Hi, I'm Claire Donovan. 3 months ago, my father traded away a Purple Heart for champagne fountains and ice sculptures. The medal belonged to my grandfather, Colonel Thomas Donovan, who carried it through frozen mountains in Korea and brought it home in a wooden box stained with mud and memory. My dad didn't ask me. He didn't hesitate. He just sold it to pay for my sister Vanessa's wedding because apparently white doves and a live string quartet matter more than honoring a man who gave everything for this country. When the antique dealer tracked me down, I realized the betrayal went deeper than I ever imagined. Now they want me to smile in family photos and pretend nothing happened. They want forgiveness without ever admitting what they took from me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was restocking shelves at the community center thrift shop where I volunteered twice a week. My phone buzzed against the folding table, and I almost ignored it. The number showed a Portland area code I didn't recognize, and I'd been getting spam calls all week about extended car warranties. But something made me swipe to answer. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate giving me one last chance to see the truth before it buried me completely. A man's voice came through, older, careful with his words like he was stepping around broken glass. "Is this Claire Donovan?" I confirmed, still holding a donated lamp shaped like a lighthouse. "This is Gregory Walsh from Pacific Military Collectibles on Hawthorne. I'm calling about an item that came into my shop last week. A collection of military medals and correspondence. The paperwork listed you as next of kin for Colonel Thomas Donovan." The lamp almost slipped from my hands. I set it down slowly, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" "My grandfather's medals are at my parents' house in Eugene. They're in the display case in the living room. I see them every time I visit." There was a pause, the kind that carries weight. "Ma'am, I have the medals here. They were brought in by a Richard Donovan. He signed the consignment agreement 5 days ago. According to military records and the documentation your grandfather kept with the collection, you were designated as the intended recipient. Your name is actually engraved inside the case. I thought you should know before we finalized the sale." The thrift shop suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. My father's voice echoed in my memory from 3 weeks ago when I'd asked about the display case during Sunday dinner. "Oh, we moved some things around," he'd said, waving his hand dismissively. "Your mother wanted to redecorate. The medals are safe. Don't worry about it." I'd believed him because you want to believe your parents, even when the pattern suggests you shouldn't. I managed to ask Gregory Walsh to hold the collection, told him I'd be there within the hour, and hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on one of the donated couches, springs poking through the threadbare fabric. The other volunteer, an elderly woman named Dottie, asked if I was all right. I nodded, but I wasn't. I was the furthest thing from all right. The drive from Selwood to the shop on Hawthorne took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. I kept replaying every interaction from the past month, looking for clues I'd missed. Vanessa's engagement had been announced at Christmas, just after the New Year, and immediately everything became about the wedding. She wanted it in June at Timberline Lodge with mountain views and wildflowers and 200 guests. The budget kept climbing. First it was $20,000, then $30,000, then somewhere north of $45,000. Every family dinner became a planning session with Vanessa holding court while Mom took notes and Dad nodded along, promising to make it happen. I'd offered to help with decorations, said I could make centerpieces or coordinate the rehearsal dinner. Vanessa had looked at me like I'd offered to show up in a garbage bag. "That's sweet, Claire, but we're hiring professionals. This needs to be perfect." She'd turned back to her Pinterest board on Mom's tablet, scrolling through images of weddings that looked like they belonged in magazines, not in real life. The shop was tucked between a vintage clothing store and a coffee roaster, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing unless you were looking for it. A bell chimed when I pushed open the door. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and metal polish. Display cases lined the walls, filled with uniforms, medals, helmets, flags folded into precise triangles. Gregory Walsh stood behind the counter, a man in his 60s with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He looked up when I entered, and his expression shifted to something like sympathy. "You must be Claire." He reached under the counter and lifted out a wooden case I'd known my entire life. It was made of cherry wood, darkened with age, with brass hinges that had tarnished to a soft green. My grandfather had built it himself in his garage workshop, spent weeks getting the joints perfect. I used to trace the grain with my fingers when I was small, listening to him tell stories about the men he'd served with, the cold that sank into your bones in those Korean mountains, the letters from my grandmother that kept him alive when everything else tried to kill him. Gregory set the case on the counter between us and opened it. The medals lay against faded blue velvet. The Purple Heart in the center, flanked by the Korean Service Medal, the Combat Infantryman Badge, the National Defense Service Medal. Beneath them, in a smaller compartment, were the letters. Dozens of them, tied with string that had gone brittle with time. My grandmother's handwriting covered the envelopes, ink faded but still legible. And tucked into the lid was the compass, brass and scratched, with coordinates engraved on the back. The exact location where my grandfather had proposed to my grandmother in 1953, on a hill overlooking Eugene before he shipped out. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely. Gregory cleared his throat gently. "Your grandfather specified in his will that this collection was meant for you. He filed the documentation with the Veterans Affairs Office in 1998. Your father would have known that." My father absolutely knew that. I'd been there when Grandpa Tom sat me down 2 years before he died, his hands shaking from the Parkinson's that would eventually take him. "Claire, you're the one who listens. You're the one who remembers. When I'm gone, these are yours. Not to sell, not to put in storage. To keep. To remember." He'd made me promise. I'd held his hand and sworn I would. He'd smiled, squeezed my fingers with what strength he had left, and said, "You've got his heart, kid. Don't let anyone tell you different." How much was my father asking for them? My voice came out flat, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Gregory hesitated. $8,500. That's fair market value for a collection like this. The letters alone are historically significant. But honestly, Miss Donovan, the sentimental value is incalculable. These items tell a story. They shouldn't be separated from the family. I thought about Vanessa's wedding. The ice sculpture. The champagne fountain. The designer dress that cost more than my car. The custom invitations with gold leaf edging. $8,500 was probably just covering the flowers. My father had sold my inheritance, sold my grandfather's legacy, sold the promise I'd made to a dying man, all so Vanessa could have swans made of butter and a dessert table with 15 different options. Something cold settled in my chest, heavy and solid like a stone dropping into deep water. "Can you hold this collection for me? I need to handle some things first." "I'll pay whatever deposit you need." Gregory shook his head. "No deposit necessary. I'll mark it as held pending family resolution. Take your time. These deserve to go home." I drove back to my apartment in a daze, the city blurring past my windows. The sun was setting over the West Hills, painting everything in shades of orange and pink that felt too beautiful for how I was feeling inside. I parked in my usual spot behind the building and sat there as the light faded, hands still gripping the steering wheel. My phone rang. Dad. I stared at his name on the screen, watched it ring 4 times, then go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. "Hey honey, tried calling. Your mom and I were hoping you could come to dinner this weekend. Vanessa wants to show you the final seating chart. Love you. Love you." 2 words that were supposed to mean something. 2 words my father typed while knowing he'd sold the one thing in this world I'd been promised, the one connection I had left to a man who'd actually seen me as more than background scenery in someone else's story. I didn't respond. Instead, I went inside, climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment, and stood in the small living room I'd furnished with second-hand finds and clearance items. The walls were covered with photos. Most of them featured Grandpa Tom. Him in uniform, young and serious. Him at my high school graduation, one of the few family members who'd shown up. Him teaching me to fish at Fern Ridge Lake, both of us sunburned and grinning. Him at Thanksgiving, telling stories that made everyone laugh, except he was always looking at me when he said the important parts, the true parts, making sure I understood what he was really saying. You're the strong one, Claire Bear. Don't let them convince you otherwise. That's what he'd told me the last Christmas before he died. We'd been sitting on the porch while everyone else was inside arguing about football and politics. He'd taken my hand, paper-thin skin over bones that had once been strong enough to carry wounded men through combat zones. They're going to try to make you small. Don't let them. I hadn't understood then. I was 23 and still believed that if I just tried hard enough, worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, eventually they'd see me. But Grandpa Tom had known. He'd seen the pattern forming, seen how Vanessa could do no wrong while I could do nothing right. How my achievements were dismissed as showing off while hers were celebrated as exceptional. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. How I was always asked to accommodate, to understand, to give a little more. The next morning, I called Aunt Lorraine. She was my father's older sister, a woman who'd never married, spent 40 years teaching high school English, and had a spine made of steel wrapped in cardigans and practical shoes. She'd been the one to sit with Grandpa Tom during his final days when the rest of the family was too busy, too uncomfortable with hospitals and death. She'd held his hand when he slipped away at 3 a.m, and she'd been the one to make sure his funeral was exactly what he wanted, with full military honors and a 21-gun salute that echoed across the cemetery. Lorraine answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and alert despite the early hour. Claire. What's wrong? She'd always been able to read me, even over the phone. I told her everything. The call from Gregory Walsh. The medals. The consignment agreement signed by my father. The $8,500 that was supposed to help pay for Vanessa's excessive wedding. I told her about the promise I'd made to Grandpa Tom and how I'd been lied to for weeks, assured that everything was safe when it was already gone. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Lorraine spoke, her voice carrying a fury I'd rarely heard from her. That son of a bitch. I'm sorry, Claire, but that's exactly what your father is. Tom made his wishes crystal clear. Richard was at the will reading. He knew those medals were meant for you. How dare he? How absolutely dare he? What do I do? I felt lost, untethered. Part of me wanted to drive to Eugene right now and confront my father. Another part wanted to curl up and pretend I'd never gotten that phone call. But the strongest part, the part that sounded like Grandpa Tom's voice in my head, wanted justice. You document everything. You get copies of the will, the VA paperwork, anything that proves those medals were designated for you. You contact Gregory Walsh and you get that collection back where it belongs. And then, Lorraine paused, and I could almost see her straightening her shoulders the way she did before delivering bad news to a student. Then you make sure your father understands exactly what he's done. Not with screaming. Not with drama. With facts and consequences. She paused again. I'll help you. Tom would want me to help you. That afternoon, Lorraine drove up from Eugene with a file box full of documents. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment, spreading papers across a corner table while rain streaked down the windows. She'd brought copies of Grandpa Tom's will, correspondence with the VA, even photos of the medals that she'd taken during the estate inventory. Everything proved the same thing in my grandfather's careful handwriting and legal documentation: the collection was meant for me. It had always been meant for me. There was also a letter I'd never seen before, written by Grandpa Tom and left in Lorraine's care. The envelope had my name on it in his shaky late-life script. Open this when you need to remember who you are. I looked at Lorraine. She nodded. I opened it. Claire Bear, the letter began, and my eyes immediately filled with tears. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Maybe I'm already gone and someone is trying to take what I meant for you to have. Maybe you're doubting yourself, wondering if you deserve to fight for what's yours. Let me be clear. You deserve everything good in this world. You are strong, capable, and worthy of respect. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially not family who should know better. The medals aren't just metal and ribbon. They're proof that we fight for what matters, even when it costs us. Especially when it costs us. Stand your ground. Make me proud. You already do. All my love, Grandpa Tom. I set the letter down carefully, afraid I might tear it with how hard my hands were shaking. Lorraine reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. He knew. He always knew they'd try something. We spent the next hour planning. Lorraine had already contacted a lawyer friend who specialized in estate law. The consultation was free, and according to Lorraine, the case was clear-cut. The medals had been legally designated to me. My father had no right to sell them. We could pursue legal action if necessary, but Lorraine thought exposure might be more effective. Richard cares more about his reputation than almost anything else. If people knew what he'd done, especially the veterans community that Tom was part of, it would destroy him. I thought about that. My father was a member of the American Legion. He'd served briefly in the National Guard, though he'd never deployed, never seen combat, spent his service stateside doing administrative work. But he wore his veteran status like a badge of honor, showed up at Memorial Day ceremonies, gave speeches about sacrifice and duty. What would those people think if they knew he'd sold his father's Purple Heart to fund a wedding? What would Uncle Frank think? Uncle Frank wasn't actually my uncle. He was Colonel Frank Morrison, one of Grandpa Tom's closest friends from Korea, a man who'd saved my grandfather's life during an ambush and carried him 3 miles through enemy territory to a medic station. They'd stayed in touch for 60 years, met for coffee once a month until Grandpa Tom got too sick to leave the house. Frank still sent me birthday cards every year with a crisp $20 bill inside and a note that always said, "Tom was proud of you." So am I. I sat in my apartment that evening with all the documents spread across my coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. The rain had picked up outside, drumming steadily against the windows, and I'd made myself tea that had gone cold in the mug while I read through everything again. Grandpa Tom's handwriting appeared over and over in these papers, each letter carefully formed even as his hands had grown weaker. He'd been meticulous about this, had wanted no confusion about his intentions. The medals were mine. The letters were mine. The compass with those coordinates engraved on the back, the exact spot where he'd knelt in the dirt and asked my grandmother to marry him before shipping out to a war that might kill him, that was mine too. My phone kept lighting up with messages from the family group chat. Vanessa had sent approximately 47 photos of napkin options, each one seemingly identical to my untrained eye. Mom was responding to every single image with heart emojis and exclamation points. Dad chimed in occasionally with thumbs-up reactions. I watched the messages pile up, a steady stream of wedding minutiae, and felt something crack open inside my chest. They were all there, all participating in this performance of family unity, and not one of them had mentioned the medals. Not one of them had said a word about what my father had done. I scrolled back through weeks of chat history. There were discussions about florists and photographers, debates about whether salmon or chicken was more elegant for the main course, a minor crisis when Vanessa discovered her third-choice bridesmaid dress had been discontinued. I found the day my father would have signed those consignment papers, would have walked into Gregory Walsh's shop carrying that cherrywood case and handed over my inheritance for a price. The family chat from that day was full of messages about cake flavors. Vanessa wanted something with edible gold leaf. Mom thought that might be too much. Dad said whatever made his princess happy. His princess. That's what he'd always called Vanessa. She'd been the princess and I'd been, what exactly? The dependable one. The responsible one. The one who didn't need special attention because I was fine, always fine, never requiring the kind of care and feeding that Vanessa seemed to demand every moment of every day. When Vanessa graduated high school with a C+ average, they threw her a party with catering and a DJ. When I graduated summa cum laude, We went to dinner at the same chain restaurant we always went to, and my father spent most of the meal on his phone dealing with a work emergency. When Vanessa got her first apartment, they co-signed her lease and bought her furniture and gave her money for decorations. When I got my first apartment, my father handed me $100 and said this should help with the deposit, then never asked if I needed anything else. I didn't. I'd learned not to need things from them. But this was different. This wasn't about equal love or fair treatment or any of the small accumulated slights that I'd learned to absorb and move past. This was theft. This was taking something that had been explicitly, legally, morally promised to me and trading it away like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. I picked up my phone and opened a new text to my father. Typed out several versions of what I wanted to say. Each one came out either too angry or too hurt or too desperate for an explanation that would somehow make this okay. Finally, I deleted them all and wrote something simple. I know about the medals. We need to talk. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then watched the screen. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing he was typing. They pulsed for a long moment, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Then disappeared again. Finally, a message came through. Can we discuss this in person? Sunday dinner at the house? Sunday dinner. As if this was something that could be resolved over pot roast and small talk. As if I would sit at that table and pretend everything was normal while my father explained away what he'd done. I typed back a single word. No. Then added, the medals were legally designated to me. Grandpa Tom made that clear. You had no right to sell them. The response took longer this time. Claire, you're overreacting. The wedding is expensive and we're all making sacrifices. Those medals were just sitting in a case. Nobody was looking at them. At least now they're going to someone who appreciates military history. I read that message 3 times, feeling my disbelief turn into something harder and colder. Just sitting in a case. As if that diminished their value. As if the fact that we weren't actively staring at them every moment meant they were disposable. I thought about all the times I'd stood in front of that case during family visits, reading the citations, touching the glass over the Purple Heart, remembering the stories Grandpa Tom had told me. Stories about the men who died next to him. Stories about the cold so severe that weapons froze and wouldn't fire. Stories about fear and courage and the impossible choices you make when everything around you is trying to kill you. My hands were shaking again. I set the phone down and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The street below was quiet, just a few cars passing through the rain-slicked darkness. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably looking at more napkin samples or arguing with her wedding planner about the exact shade of blush pink for the table runners. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably making lists and checking budgets and finding ways to make Vanessa's perfect day even more perfect. And my father who'd served his country in the safest possible way and then built a career on telling people about duty and honor, my father had sold a Purple Heart to pay for ice sculptures. I picked up my phone again and called Lorraine. She answered with her usual briskness. Tell me you didn't respond to him yet. I sent 2 texts. Should I not have done that? What did you say? I read her the exchange. She made a noise that might have been approval or might have been exasperation. Okay. Not terrible. But don't engage anymore. Let him sit with it. Let him wonder what you're going to do. We need him off balance when we make our next move. What is our next move? I felt out of my depth. I'd never been the one to make waves. I'd spent my entire life being the easy child, the one who didn't cause problems, who understood when things didn't go my way, who made room for Vanessa's needs and wants and endless demands for attention. Lorraine's voice softened slightly. Tomorrow you go back to Gregory Walsh and you get those medals. You pay whatever he's asking and you bring them home. I'll cover it if you need help. Then we wait. The wedding is in 3 weeks, right? I confirmed. Good. We let them think you've dropped it. Let them relax. And then, right when they're feeling safe, we show them what consequences actually look like. The next morning I drove back to Pacific Military Collectibles with a cashier's check from my savings account. $8,500 represented nearly everything I had. I'd been saving for years, putting away a little bit from each paycheck, thinking someday I'd have enough for a down payment on a small house or maybe go back to school. Now it was going to buy back what should have been mine for free. Gregory Walsh looked up when I entered, and something in his expression told me he'd been expecting me. I brought the medals back. That's what I said, simple and direct. He nodded slowly and retrieved the cherry wood case from somewhere behind the counter. When he set it down in front of me, I had to resist the urge to grab it and run. Instead I handed over the check. He looked at it for a long moment. "Miss Donovan, I've been doing this for 30 years. I can usually tell when something is more than just a transaction. These medals, they mean something to you." He paused, then did something I didn't expect. He tore the check in half. "Consider it a return to the rightful owner. Your grandfather's service deserves better than this." I stared at him. "I can't, you'd lose money on," but he cut me off. "Some things matter more than money. Take them home. Honor his memory. That's payment enough." I don't know what I said. Thank you felt inadequate. I think I might have just nodded, might have gotten tears in my eyes that I blinked back hard. Gregory Walsh carefully placed the case in a bag and handed it to me like he was passing over something sacred. He'd wrapped it in tissue paper and tied the handles with string. "Take care of yourself, Miss Donovan. And if you don't mind my saying so, family that treats you like this isn't family worth keeping." The drive home felt different with the medals in the passenger seat. I kept glancing over at the bag, reassuring myself it was real, that I had them back. When I got to my apartment I carried the case inside like it might shatter if I moved too quickly. I set it on my kitchen table and just looked at it for a while. Then slowly, carefully, I opened it. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The medals gleaming softly against the velvet. The letters tied with their brittle string. The compass nestled in its compartment. I lifted out one of the letters, holding it by the edges. The envelope was addressed to Private Thomas Donovan at a military postal address I didn't recognize. The return address was my grandmother's careful script from the house in Eugene where I'd spent so many childhood afternoons. I didn't open the letter. These were private, meant for Grandpa Tom, meant for the man who'd been thousands of miles from home wondering if he'd survive long enough to see her again. But I held it gently, feeling the weight of all that longing and fear and hope pressed into paper. My phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Hey, where have you been? Mom says you're not coming to Sunday dinner. Is everything okay?" The message was accompanied by a selfie of her in what I assumed was her wedding dress, white silk and lace and a train that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She looked radiant. She looked happy. She looked like someone who had no idea that her perfect day was built on theft and betrayal. I set the phone face down on the table and didn't respond. Instead I carefully closed the metal case and carried it to my bedroom. I had a closet with a high shelf that I needed a stepladder to reach. I put the case up there, pushed it back as far as it would go, and covered it with winter blankets. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was safe. No one was taking these from me again. The weeks before the wedding crawled past. I went to work at the community center, came home, avoided family calls. My mother left increasingly concerned voicemails. "Claire, honey, we really need you at the final dress fitting. Claire, we're worried about you. Claire, your sister is hurt that you're pulling away during the most important time of her life." I listened to each message once, then deleted it. Vanessa sent periodic texts, mostly questions about whether I was coming to the wedding, whether I'd picked up my bridesmaid dress from the shop where it was being altered, whether I had any dietary restrictions for the rehearsal dinner. I responded to those with single-word answers. Yes. Yes. No. Lorraine called every few days to check in. "How are you holding up?" She'd ask, and I'd tell her I was fine, which was mostly true. I felt hollowed out, scraped clean of whatever illusions I'd been carrying about my family. But I also felt something else. A strange clarity. Like I'd been walking through fog my entire life and suddenly the air had cleared and I could see exactly where I was standing. The Thursday before the wedding, I got a call from Uncle Frank. His gravelly voice came through warm and familiar. "Claire Bear, what's this I hear about you skipping family dinners? Your grandmother would have had something to say about that." I smiled despite everything. Uncle Frank had a way of making even bad situations feel manageable. I told him I'd been busy with work, which wasn't entirely a lie. He made a non-committal sound. "You know, your grandpa Tom used to say that busy was what people claimed when they didn't want to deal with something hard. You dealing with something hard, kiddo?" I found myself telling him everything. About the medals, about my father's casual dismissal of their significance, about the $8,500 that was supposed to buy Vanessa swans made of butter. Uncle Frank listened without interrupting, which was one of his gifts. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, in a voice that carried the weight of decades and wars and losses I couldn't imagine, "Your grandfather would be proud of how you're handling this. He wouldn't want you to let it go. Tom never let anything go when it mattered." He paused again. "I'll be at that wedding. Wouldn't miss it for the world." The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant in downtown Portland that specialized in farm-to-table cuisine and had exposed brick walls covered in tasteful art. I arrived exactly on time wearing a simple black dress I'd owned for years, nothing special, nothing that would draw attention. Vanessa had requested that everyone dress elegantly but not so elegantly that they'd outshine her, which seemed like an impossible balance, but I'd stopped trying to decode her logic years ago. The private dining room was already full when I walked in. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in months, Vanessa's bridesmaids clustered in one corner taking group photos, Brandon's family looking slightly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of Donovan relatives. My mother spotted me first and rushed over with her arms outstretched like I'd returned from war. "Claire, oh sweetheart, we've missed you so much." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like her expensive perfume and hairspray. "You look thin. Have you been eating? Are you sleeping enough?" "I'm fine, Mom." I extracted myself gently and scanned the room. My father was standing near the bar talking to Brandon's father, both men holding glasses of whiskey and laughing at something. He glanced up, caught my eye, and his smile faltered for just a second before he recovered and raised his glass in my direction. I didn't acknowledge it. Vanessa materialized beside me in a rose-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked me up and down with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You came." She said it like she genuinely doubted I would show up. For a moment I saw something flicker across her face that might have been vulnerability or might have been calculation. I've never been good at telling the difference with her. "I'm so glad you're here. This week has been so stressful and I really needed my sister." She linked her arm through mine and steered me toward her bridesmaids, launching into introductions I barely processed. These were women I'd met before at various pre-wedding events, women with impressive jobs and designer handbags who all seemed to speak the same language of spin classes and vacation homes and investments. They smiled at me with polite disinterest, the kind of smile you give someone who doesn't quite fit but you're too well-mannered to acknowledge it. Dinner was served family-style with platters of roasted vegetables and herb-crusted chicken and some kind of grain salad studded with pomegranate seeds. I sat between a cousin I barely knew and one of Brandon's groomsmen who spent the entire meal talking across me to the bridesmaid on his other side. I pushed food around my plate and tried to look engaged while my father stood up to give a toast. He'd always been good at speeches. Years of business presentations had made him comfortable in front of crowds, confident in his ability to command attention. He tapped his glass with a fork and the room quieted instantly. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate Brandon and Vanessa." He smiled at them, sitting at the head of the table holding hands like they were posing for a magazine spread. "Tomorrow we get to witness something beautiful. Two people who love each other committing to a lifetime together. As a father, there's nothing more precious than seeing your daughter happy. Vanessa, you've always been my princess, and Brandon, you're getting something truly special." People clapped and made approving noises. My father continued, talking about sacrifice and family and how important it was to support the people you love. I watched him, this man who could speak so eloquently about values he clearly didn't actually hold. He talked about honor. He talked about putting family first. He talked about the sacrifices we all make for the people who matter most. Every word felt like a slap. When he finished and sat back down to applause, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and stood there breathing slowly, counting to 10, then 20, then 30. I would not cry at my sister's rehearsal dinner. I would not make a scene. I would get through this with dignity and then I would leave and I would never have to pretend again. But when I came back out, Uncle Frank was waiting in the hallway. He'd aged since I'd last seen him, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but he still stood with the posture of someone who'd spent decades in military service. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts concern and understanding. "You doing okay, kiddo?" I nodded automatically, then stopped and shook my head. He put a hand on my shoulder, solid and reassuring. "Tom used to tell me about the hardest part of combat. It wasn't the fear or the pain or even the loss. It was watching people you trusted fail to be who you needed them to be. That's what breaks you, if you let it." He squeezed my shoulder gently. "Don't let it break you." We walked back into the dining room together. My father was now circulating among the tables, playing the gracious host, making sure everyone had drinks and felt included. He saw me come in with Uncle Frank and something crossed his face too quickly for me to identify. Uncle Frank steered me to a quiet corner where Aunt Lorraine was sitting alone, nursing a glass of wine and watching the festivities with the detached air of someone observing a play they'd seen too many times. She looked up when we approached. "There's my favorite niece." She patted the chair next to her and I sat, grateful for the buffer of allies. Uncle Frank took the seat across from us. Lorraine leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "I had an interesting conversation with your mother earlier. She wanted to know why you've been distant lately." I told her I had no idea. She gave me a look that suggested I was being difficult. "Apparently your absence from family dinners has been noted and discussed at length." "What did you tell her?" I kept my voice equally quiet, aware that we were in a room full of people who would love nothing more than fresh gossip. "I told her that perhaps if they treated you with the same consideration they show Vanessa, you might be more inclined to participate in family events." Lorraine took a sip of her wine. She didn't care for that observation. Uncle Frank made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been disgust. "I've known your father since he was in diapers. Richard was always good at looking like he was doing the right thing." Emphasis on looking. "Your grandfather saw through it. Used to worry about what would happen when he wasn't around anymore to keep Richard honest." I glanced across the room at my father, still working the crowd, still playing his part perfectly. "Did Grandpa Tom know?" I asked. "Did he know Dad would do something like this?" Uncle Frank and Lorraine exchanged a look. Frank spoke first. "Tom knew your father had priorities that didn't always align with what was right. Why do you think he was so specific about those medals going to you?" "He didn't trust Richard to do the honorable thing. He wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. He made his wishes legal precisely because he knew they might not be respected otherwise." The weight of that settled over me. My grandfather had known. Had seen the pattern. Had tried to protect me from exactly what ended up happening anyway. I felt a surge of grief so intense I had to close my eyes for a moment. Lorraine's hand found mine under the table and held it firmly. "You're not alone in this. Remember that. Whatever happens tomorrow, you have people who see the truth." The rest of the evening blurred together. More toasts, more laughter, more performance of family unity. I smiled when expected, laughed at appropriate moments, hugged people who wanted to tell me how beautiful the wedding was going to be. When it finally ended, I escaped to my car and sat in the parking garage for a long time, watching other guests leave in clusters, voices echoing off the concrete. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Thank you for coming tonight. It meant a lot. Tomorrow is going to be perfect." I didn't respond. I drove home through streets that were unusually empty for a Friday night, let myself into my apartment, and went straight to the closet. I pulled down the cherrywood case and carried it to my bed. I opened it and looked at the medals, really looked at them. The purple heart with its gold border and profile of George Washington. The ribbon in purple with white edges. I lifted it carefully from the velvet and held it in my palm. This piece of metal represented blood and pain and survival. It represented a moment when my grandfather's body had been torn open by shrapnel and he'd kept fighting anyway because the men around him needed him to. It represented every choice he'd made to get home alive, to build a life, to raise a family that included a son who would one day sell this medal like it was a collectible card worth exactly $8,500. I placed it back carefully and moved to the letters. I'd never read them, had felt like they were too private, too intimate. But tonight I needed to hear my grandmother's voice, needed to understand what had kept my grandfather alive in those frozen mountains. I untied the brittle string and selected a letter at random. The envelope was postmarked February 1952. I slid out the thin paper, covered in my grandmother's neat handwriting. "My dearest Tom," it began. "The winter here has been hard but nothing compared to what you must be facing. I think of you every moment, worry about you every second. Your mother came by yesterday and we sat together looking at your photograph. She cried and I held her hand and promised her you were coming home. You have to come home, Tom. You have to survive this because I cannot imagine a world without you in it. The garden is frozen solid. The house is too quiet. Everything is waiting for you to return and make it whole again." I read through more letters, each one a glimpse into a love that had sustained itself across impossible distance. My grandmother wrote about mundane things, neighborhood gossip and rationing and the weather, but underneath every word was the same desperate plea. Come home. Stay alive. Don't leave me alone. And my grandfather had listened. He'd survived. He'd come home. He'd built a life with her that lasted 58 years until cancer took her suddenly one autumn. He'd followed her 6 months later, unable or unwilling to exist in a world she no longer occupied. These letters were part of that story. They were proof that love could survive anything if both people refused to let go. And my father had tried to sell them to a stranger so his princess could have a fountain made of champagne. I carefully retied the letters and placed them back in the case. Then I pulled out my phone and composed a text to Lorraine. I'm ready. Whatever we're doing tomorrow, I'm ready. Her response came almost immediately. Good. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we remind them what honor actually means. I woke up on the wedding day to gray skies and the threat of rain, which felt appropriate. The ceremony wasn't until 4 in the afternoon at Timberline Lodge, which meant I had hours to kill before I needed to start getting ready. I made coffee and sat by my window watching the street below come to life. Joggers passed by in their reflective gear. A man walked 3 small dogs that kept tangling their leashes. A woman swept the sidewalk in front of the bakery on the corner. Normal people doing normal things while I prepared to potentially blow up my family. My bridesmaid dress hung on the back of my bedroom door, a shade of blush pink that Vanessa had insisted would complement everyone's skin tones. I'd picked it up from the alterations shop 3 days ago and hadn't tried it on since the final fitting. I didn't particularly care if it fit perfectly or if my hair looked right or if my makeup met Vanessa's exacting standards. I was going to show up because I'd said I would, and because running away would mean they'd won. Around noon, Lorraine called. I'm at the lodge. Getting the lay of the land. It's very Vanessa. Very over the top. There are ice sculptures in the shape of swans and the flower arrangements are taller than I am. She paused. I ran into your father. He asked if you were coming. I told him you wouldn't miss it. He looked nervous. Good. Let him be nervous. I was pacing my apartment now, restless energy making it impossible to sit still. What's the plan exactly? When does Uncle Frank do his thing? Lorraine's voice took on a satisfied tone. Frank is seated at the head table. He pulled some strings with the event coordinator, claimed he was giving a special toast on behalf of your grandfather's military service. Your father approved it thinking it would add gravitas to the ceremony. He has no idea what's actually coming." She laughed quietly. Tom would have loved this. The righteous ambush. That was always his favorite tactical maneuver. I thought about my grandfather, imagined him watching from wherever he was now, and hoped Lorraine was right. "I hope we're doing the right thing." The words came out smaller than I'd intended, uncertain in a way I hadn't let myself feel until now. Lorraine's response was firm. "They took something that wasn't theirs. They lied to you. They dismissed your grief and your connection to a man who loved you. We're not doing anything except telling the truth. If that makes them uncomfortable, that's a consequence they earned." The drive up to Timberline Lodge took nearly 2 hours through winding mountain roads that climbed steadily toward the snowline. Mount Hood loomed ahead, its peak lost in clouds, and I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel as the road narrowed and curved. Other wedding guests passed me in their expensive cars, probably staying at the lodge overnight, probably not wrestling with the decision to detonate their family relationships in front of 200 witnesses. I'd left early to give myself time to think, time to maybe change my mind. The rational part of my brain kept whispering that I could just let it go, show up, smile through the ceremony, dance at the reception, and then quietly distance myself over time. Nobody had to know about the medals except the people who already knew. I could protect myself without creating a scene. But every time I started to convince myself that silence was the better option, I'd remember my grandfather's letter. "Stand your ground. Make me proud." He hadn't written those words so I could take the easy path. The lodge appeared around a curve, massive and imposing against the mountain backdrop. Built in the 1930s, it looked like something from another era with its stone facade and heavy timber construction. Cars were already filling the parking area, valets in black vests directing traffic. I pulled into a spot near the back and sat for a moment, watching well-dressed people stream toward the entrance. Women in cocktail dresses and heels navigating the gravel carefully. Men in dark suits checking their phones. Everyone looked elegant and composed, ready to witness Vanessa's perfect day. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My makeup was simple, neutral tones that wouldn't photograph badly but wouldn't stand out either. My hair was pulled back in a low bun, nothing fancy. I looked like someone trying very hard not to be noticed, which was exactly what I'd been doing my entire life. Today that ended. Inside, the lodge was controlled chaos. Wedding coordinators rushed around with clipboards and headsets. Florists made last-minute adjustments to arrangements that were indeed taller than Aunt Lorraine. The ice sculptures sat on tables draped in blush pink linens, already starting to melt slightly in the warmth of the interior. I found my way to the bridal suite where Vanessa and her bridesmaids were getting ready, knocked once, and entered without waiting for a response. Vanessa sat in front of a massive mirror surrounded by a team of people attending to various aspects of her appearance. A makeup artist dabbed at her face with a brush. A hairstylist wove small white flowers into her updo. Someone else was steaming her dress in the corner. She looked up when I entered and her face broke into a smile that seemed genuine. "Claire, you're here." I was starting to worry. "Come look at this, do you think the flowers are too much?" I moved closer and examined the delicate blooms woven through her dark hair. "They're beautiful." It wasn't a lie. She did look beautiful, radiant in the way brides are supposed to look, glowing with happiness and anticipation. For a moment I felt the weight of what I was about to do, the knowledge that this day she'd planned for months would be remembered for something other than her dress or her vows or her first dance. One of the bridesmaids, a woman named Ashley or Amber or something that started with A, thrust a champagne flute into my hand. "We're toasting to the bride. Bottoms up." I took the glass but didn't drink, just held it while everyone else raised theirs and said things about love and happiness and forever. Vanessa caught my eye in the mirror and for a second I thought I saw something there, some flicker of awareness that things weren't quite right. But then someone asked about her shoes and the moment passed. I excused myself after a few minutes, claiming I needed to check on something. The ceremony space was in the main hall, rows of chairs set up facing a stone fireplace decorated with more of those towering flower arrangements. The ceiling soared overhead, massive wooden beams creating a cathedral effect. It was breathtaking. It was also exactly the kind of venue that cost a fortune to book, the kind of place that required selling family heirlooms to afford. Aunt Lorraine found me standing in the back. She wore a navy dress and sensible heels, her silver hair styled simply. She looked like the retired teacher she was, someone you trust to grade your essays fairly and tell you the truth even when it hurt. "You look pale. Are you okay?" "I don't know." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "This feels bigger than I thought it would. All these people. They're here for a wedding, not for whatever we're about to do." Lorraine took my hand and squeezed it hard. "Listen to me. Those people are here because they were invited to witness a celebration. But celebrations built on dishonesty don't deserve to go unmarked. Your grandfather served his country with honor. He came home and built a life and tried to instill values in his children. One of those children failed him spectacularly. That failure doesn't get to hide behind white roses and string quartets." Uncle Frank appeared from somewhere, moving with the careful gait of someone whose knees had logged too many miles. He wore his dress uniform, dark blue with rows of ribbons across his chest. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd earned every piece of metal pinned to his jacket through years of service and sacrifice. He looked at me with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You ready, Claire Bear?" I nodded because speaking felt impossible. He patted my shoulder with a hand that had once carried my grandfather through enemy fire. "Tom's watching. He's proud of you. Don't you doubt that for a second." Guests began filing in, finding their seats, admiring the decorations. I spotted my mother near the front, resplendent in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my car payment. She was greeting people, hugging relatives, performing the role of mother of the bride with practiced ease. My father stood beside her in a tailored suit, shaking hands and laughing at jokes. They looked like the perfect couple, the proud parents, the family who had everything together. I took my seat in the second row with the other bridesmaids. Ashley or Amber sat next to me and immediately started taking selfies, adjusting her angle to get the flower arrangements in the background. The string quartet began playing something classical and pretty. The officiant took his place by the fireplace. Brandon and his groomsmen filed in looking nervous and excited. Then the wedding march started and everyone stood and turned toward the back. Vanessa appeared in the doorway on my father's arm. Her dress was stunning, fitted lace over silk with a train that seemed to go on forever. Her veil floated behind her like a cloud. She moved slowly down the aisle, smiling at guests, pausing for the photographer. My father looked like he might burst with pride, his chest puffed out, his smile enormous. When they reached the front, the officiant asked who gives this woman to be married, and my father said I do with a voice full of emotion before kissing Vanessa's cheek and taking his seat next to my mother. The ceremony proceeded with all the traditional elements. Readings about love. Vows that Vanessa and Brandon had written themselves, full of promises about partnership and forever. The exchange of rings. I stood when I was supposed to stand, sat when I was supposed to sit, held Vanessa's bouquet during the ring exchange. I did everything a bridesmaid was supposed to do while my heart hammered against my ribs and my hands went cold with anticipation of what was coming. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. They kissed while everyone applauded. The string quartet launched into something triumphant and the newly married couple walked back down the aisle beaming and waving. I followed with the other bridesmaids and groomsmen, playing my part in the recessional, and then we were ushered outside for photographs while guests moved to the cocktail hour. The photographer positioned us in various groupings for what felt like hours. Bride and groom. Bride with bridesmaids. Groom with groomsmen. Full wedding party. Family photos. I stood where I was told to stand, smiled when I was told to smile, and tried not to think about what was coming next. When they finally released us, Vanessa grabbed my hand. "Thank you for being here. I know we haven't been as close lately, but it means everything that you're standing with me today." I looked at my sister, really looked at her. She believed what she was saying. In her mind, whatever distance had grown between us was just one of those things that happened, not a direct result of choices our family had made over and over again. She had no idea about the medals. I was certain of that now. My father had handled it quietly, had sold them and pocketed the money and told no one because he knew it was indefensible. Vanessa was guilty of a lot of things but not this particular betrayal. Of course. My voice came out steady. I wouldn't have missed it. We moved to the reception hall where round tables surrounded a dance floor. The ice sculptures had been moved here and were now melting in earnest, small pools forming on their tablecloths. The head table sat on a raised platform, decorated with even more flowers and candles that cast everything in a warm glow. I found my assigned seat at a table with other bridesmaids and their plus ones, far enough from the head table that I couldn't hear conversations but close enough to see everything clearly. Dinner was served, multiple courses that I pushed around my plate without tasting. The bridesmaids at my table chattered about the ceremony and the dress and wasn't everything just so beautiful. I made appropriate noises and checked my phone under the table. A text from Lorraine. Uncle Frank goes after the father-daughter dance. Be ready. The DJ made announcements. First dance for the bride and groom. Mother-son dance. Then my father stood and extended his hand to Vanessa for the father-daughter dance. The DJ played some sentimental song about little girls growing up and my father spun Vanessa around the floor while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and guests pulled out their phones to record the moment. They looked picture perfect, the proud father and his princess daughter, and I wondered if anyone else could see the rot underneath the pretty surface. The song ended to applause. My father kissed Vanessa's forehead and they hugged while the photographer circled them capturing every angle. Then the DJ's voice came through the speakers again. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special moment now. Colonel Frank Morrison, who served alongside the bride's grandfather in Korea, would like to say a few words. Uncle Frank made his way to the small stage where the DJ was set up. Someone handed him a microphone. He stood there for a moment in his dress uniform with all those ribbons and the crowd quieted, sensing this was something significant. He cleared his throat and when he spoke his voice carried the authority of someone used to being heard. Good evening everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Frank Morrison. I had the honor of serving with Thomas Donovan, Vanessa and Claire's grandfather, in Korea over 70 years ago. Tom was the finest man I ever knew. Brave beyond measure, loyal to his core, and absolutely committed to doing the right thing no matter the cost. I watched my father shift in his seat. His smile had frozen on his face. Uncle Frank continued. Tom received a Purple Heart for injuries sustained in combat. He carried shrapnel in his body for the rest of his life, a constant reminder of what he'd given for this country. Before he passed, Tom made very specific arrangements for that medal and the other items in his military collection. He wanted them to go to someone who would honor them, who would remember not just the medal and ribbon but the men who died and the sacrifices that were made. The room was completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. Tom designated his granddaughter Claire as the recipient of his military honors. He made this legally binding. He made it clear. And yet, his voice hardened. A few weeks ago those medals were sold to pay for this wedding. Sold without Claire's knowledge or consent. Sold as if a Purple Heart was just another expense line in a wedding budget. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth. My father had gone pale, his jaw clenched tight. Vanessa looked confused, turning to Brandon and then to my parents as if someone could explain what was happening. Uncle Frank wasn't finished. I spent 3 days carrying Tom through enemy territory after he was hit. 3 days with barely any food or water, with enemy patrols looking for us, with Tom bleeding and in agony. He survived because he was too stubborn to die, because he had a wife waiting for him at home and a future he wasn't willing to give up. That Purple Heart represents his blood and his courage. It represents every soldier who came home broken and every soldier who didn't come home at all. He paused, letting that sink in. His eyes found my father in the crowd. Richard, you served briefly in the National Guard. You never deployed, never saw combat, never had to make the choices your father made. But you wear your veteran status like a badge of honor. You give speeches at Memorial Day ceremonies about sacrifice and duty. And then you sold your father's Purple Heart to pay for ice sculptures and champagne fountains. My father stood abruptly. His face was red now, fury and humiliation warring for dominance. This is inappropriate. This is my daughter's wedding. You have no right to, Uncle Frank's voice cut through like a blade. I have every right. Tom was my brother in arms. He saved my life more times than I can count. I stood at his grave and I promised him I'd look after his family. That includes making sure his wishes are honored and his legacy isn't sold off to the highest bidder. The reception hall had erupted into chaos. Guests were talking over each other, some standing to get a better view, others pulling out phones to record what was happening. Vanessa had tears streaming down her face, her perfect makeup ruining in real time. Brandon stood beside her looking completely lost, one hand on her shoulder. My mother was frantically whispering something to my father who looked like he wanted to either fight Uncle Frank or disappear through the floor. Uncle Frank held up his hand for silence and somehow, incredibly, people quieted down. There's more you should know. The medals were recovered thanks to the integrity of an antique dealer named Gregory Walsh who recognized that something wasn't right about the transaction. Claire paid $8,500 of her own savings to buy back what should have been hers for free. Money she'd been saving for years. Money that represented her future. All because her father decided his daughter's wedding decor mattered more than honoring a man who bled for this country. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. My face burned but I kept my chin up, kept my shoulders back. I thought about my grandfather standing at attention during ceremonies, thought about the discipline it must have taken to keep moving when your body was screaming at you to stop. I could do this. I could stand here and let the truth exist in the open air. My father found his voice finally. You're out of line, Frank. This is a family matter and you had no business airing it publicly. He turned to address the room at large. Everyone, please, this is a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. The medals were always going to go to Claire eventually. We just needed temporary liquidity for the wedding and planned to buy them back afterward. It was a lie so blatant I almost laughed. Aunt Lorraine stood from her seat near the back. That's interesting, Richard, because the consignment papers you signed had no conditions about repurchase. You sold them outright. Permanently. If Claire hadn't found out by chance, those medals would be in some collector's display case right now and you'd have never said a word. My mother stood now too, her champagne-colored gown shimmering under the lights. She looked at me with an expression I'd seen countless times before, disappointed and slightly hurt, like I was the one behaving badly. Claire, how could you do this to your sister? On her wedding day? This is cruel and selfish and completely unnecessary. We're family. Family works things out privately. I stood slowly, aware that everyone was watching me, waiting to see what I would say. My voice came out stronger than I expected. Family should work things out privately. Family should also respect each other's inheritance and keep promises made to dying grandparents. But since we're apparently redefining what family means, let me be clear. Grandpa Tom left me those medals because he knew I loved him. Because I sat with him and listened to his stories and honored his service. He made his wishes legal because he didn't trust that they'd be respected otherwise, and he was right not to trust that. Vanessa sobbed louder. Brandon was trying to comfort her but she pushed him away. You ruined my wedding. You couldn't just let me have one perfect day. It always has to be about you somehow. The word struck something deep inside me. All those years of being told I was too much or not enough, too serious or not serious enough, too demanding of attention when all I'd ever wanted was to be seen as mattering equally. I looked at my sister and felt a strange mix of pity and clarity. Vanessa, I didn't ruin your wedding. I'm just the only person telling you the truth about how it was paid for. If that ruins it for you, maybe you should ask yourself why. My father moved toward the stage, clearly intending to physically remove Uncle Frank if necessary, but several other veterans in the crowd stood up. Men and women who'd worn uniforms, who'd served, who understood what a Purple Heart actually meant. They formed a loose barrier, not threatening but unmistakably united. One of them, a woman about Uncle Frank's age, spoke up. Let him finish. We want to hear what he has to say. Uncle Frank nodded his thanks to them. I don't take pleasure in this. I wish it hadn't been necessary. But Tom Donovan deserves better than to be forgotten, better than to have his sacrifice commodified. He taught me that honor isn't about big gestures. It's about the small choices you make when nobody's watching. It's about keeping your word even when it costs you something. Richard, you've failed that test spectacularly. My father's face had gone from red to almost purple. He opened his mouth to respond, but my mother grabbed his arm, shaking her head. People were already pulling out their phones, already typing. This would be all over social media within the hour. The carefully curated image of the perfect Donovan family was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I walked to the stage and stood next to Uncle Frank. He put his arm around my shoulders and I leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. I looked out at the crowd and found I had something more to say. My grandfather told me that the hardest part of combat wasn't the fear or the pain. It was watching people you trusted fail to be who you needed them to be. I didn't understand what he meant until recently. But I understand now. He paused and looked at my parents. You taught me that family is supposed to support each other, supposed to have each other's backs. But support doesn't mean enabling dishonesty. It doesn't mean staying silent when something wrong happens. Real family tells the truth even when it's uncomfortable. The crowd was completely silent now. Even Vanessa had stopped crying, just staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. I took a breath and continued. I'm not here to destroy anyone or get revenge. I'm here because my grandfather deserved better and I made him a promise. The medals are back where they belong now. I've honored my word. I hope eventually the people in this room can say the same. Uncle Frank and I walked off the stage together. Aunt Lorraine joined us and the three of us moved toward the exit. Behind us the silence broke into a cacophony of voices, everyone talking at once, but I didn't turn around. I kept walking, head high, until we were outside in the cool mountain air. The sun was setting behind the mountain, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The three of us stood there breathing in the clean air, letting the tension drain away. Uncle Frank squeezed my shoulder. Tom would be so damn proud of you right now. I believed him. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I felt something like peace settling over me. I'd told the truth. I'd stood my ground. I'd honored the man who'd loved me unconditionally. The fallout from that would come later, the angry calls and text messages, the attempts at guilt and manipulation, the eventual demands that I apologize for embarrassing them. But right now, in this moment, I was free. 3 weeks later I was sitting on my apartment floor sorting through the letters from my grandfather's collection, reading them slowly and carefully, when my phone rang. It was Vanessa. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice was small, uncertain. Can we talk? I'd been thinking about what happened at the wedding. About everything. Dad told me his version, but I looked up the paperwork and talked to Aunt Lorraine, and I think maybe I didn't understand what was really going on. We talked for 2 hours. She cried. I didn't. She apologized for some things, tried to justify others, and I listened without offering easy forgiveness or absolution. At the end she asked if we could meet for coffee sometime. I said maybe. Maybe was the best I could offer right now. My father never called. Never apologized. Never acknowledged what he'd done. My mother sent a few messages about family needing to forgive and move forward, but when I asked if she was asking Dad to apologize or just asking me to forget, she stopped responding. The medals sit on my bookshelf now in their cherrywood case, right where I can see them every day. Sometimes I open the case and hold the Purple Heart, feeling its weight, thinking about the man who earned it and the price he paid. Sometimes I read the letters and hear my grandmother's voice speaking across decades, full of love and fear and hope. I built a life that doesn't require me to shrink or apologize for taking up space. I volunteer more at the community center. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. I started writing down Grandpa Tom's stories, all the ones I can remember, so they won't be lost. Uncle Frank has been helping, filling in details I never knew, and together we're creating something that honors not just my grandfather but all the men and women who served alongside him. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones fought on frozen mountains. Sometimes they're fought in reception halls and family dinners and quiet moments when you have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. My grandfather taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. I'm still learning that lesson, still practicing that courage, but every day it gets a little easier. The medals aren't just metal and ribbon anymore. They're a reminder that some promises are worth keeping no matter what they cost. Some truths are worth telling even when they shatter everything around you. And some families are the ones you build yourself from, people who see your worth and stand beside you when the ground shifts beneath your feet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.